I
Okay.
never thought any human being could be this happy.
All right. So we were talking to, can you hold up your book? We're talking to
Sure.
August Turk about his book, Brother John, A Monk, a Pilgrim, and the Purpose of Life. We,
Wow.
I want to talk about the next part of your journey I want to talk about going into a little bit more depth about your, as a recap, you were trying to figure out the purpose of life,
Right.
and coming from a place of I'm not even like losing everything that you knew of and realizing that perhaps that you were nothing. You're facing your own mortality, realizing you
Hmm.
were potentially nothing. And then a student asked you to go to a weekend. He was going on a weekend. He was going to
No, he was spending a summer. He was spending a whole
whole
summer at this
summer
one.
at this to become a monastic monk. You decided to join him on the spur. Now you were actually there doing field work and just living a monk's life. So tell us a little bit about what the Trappist monks. Who are they? What are their fundamental beliefs? And what you got out of that experience.
Well, I'd always been really fascinated by the Trappists because one of the people I was always interested in Zen,
Hmm.
and one of the most famous probably Trappist monk is Thomas Merton.
Mm.
And Thomas Merton wrote an incredible book called Mystics and Zen Masters, and he was very interested in Zen.
Hmm.
And I actually got interested in the Trappists through Zen. Most people end up interested in the Trappists, and then
Good
through
then.
Thomas Merton they discover Zen. With me, it was the other way around. But the Trappist monks go back all the way to 1000 AD. They are a reform of the Benedictines. The whole monastic tradition within the Catholic Church starts with Saint Benedict in like the 500s, and he brought these people together, and they became monks, and they became the Benedictines.
Hmm.
By 1000 AD, according to the Trappists, the Benedictines had become fat and happy. They weren't the Marine Corps anymore, so they reformed. They split off from the Benedictines, and they started a new order called the
Mm.
Cistercians. And the Cistercians were just, they kept silent. Their whole life is dedicated to prayer, contemplation, meditation. Um, and by the 18th century, by the 1800s, there was a monastery in France called La Trappe, and La Trappe thought that the Cistercians were starting to get fat and happy, so they reformed the order again and went back to the real brutal, just fundamentals, and they became the inspiration. So that's where you get the word Trappist from. It's the
Wow.
trap in France. So it became a nickname. The Trappist is a nickname for the Cistercian order,
Mm.
and their real name is the Order of the Cistercians of the Strict Observance (OCSO). So
Okay.
they're the heavy duty tough guys of the monastic tradition. That's they
You're
go.
like the
They,
Navy SEALs of
yes, exactly. They they
of
they
monks.
don't talk. They do they all they're not completely silent. Before they used to keep complete silence. Now they just kind of eschew. They don't talk unless it's necessary. Um, and they and they go to church 8 times a day, and they have businesses, and they raise their own. Um, for example, Trappist monk monastery I go to is called Mepkin Abbey. And when I was first going there back in the 90s, they had eggs and they had chickens. They had 40,000 chickens, and they
Oh
would
my gosh,
we,
yeah.
we would go out and harvest the eggs and grade the eggs and put them in boxes and then ship them to the grocery stores. Now they do mushrooms. So they grow these really exotic kinds of mushrooms, and they sell those to the grocery stores and things like that. So there's a long tradition that it's called the monks are ora et labora is their motto. Ora means prayer, et means and, labora means work, prayer and work. So
Mm.
that's what they believe in, praying and working. And as I put in my book, I said, and also for a Trappist monk, prayer is a form of work, and work is a form of prayer.
Wait, say that again. Prayer is a form of
Form
work.
of work, work is a form of prayer. So you pray through your work, you work through your prayer. Um, and so it's all one thing to them. Their whole life is dedicated to prayer and work. So I
Mm.
started going down there more and more and more. And as my dark night of the soul got worse and worse and worse, or better and better and better, depending how you look at it, I actually ended up spending 4 months at one time. I went down there in June and stayed through September. which God bless my partners in my business because I took a 4 month
Sabbatical,
hiatus,
yeah.
my business sabbatical, in order to spend all that time at the monastery. But so I've been going there since 1996. So I've been, and then what happened was that after I sold my business, I was still working with my college students. And one day, one of my college students sent me an email and said that the Templeton Foundation, the John Templeton Foundation, and John Templeton is a really famous investor, billionaire. And when he died, he set up this Templeton Foundation. And the Templeton Foundation had a contest called the Power of Purpose Essay Contest.
Hmm.
And it said in 3,500 words or less, you have to answer the question, what is the purpose of life?
Hmm.
And so it had been going on for a year and a half. But by the time I heard about it, there was like 2 weeks left in the contest.
Mm.
I had never written anything before in my life. And they just egged me on. My students egged me on. So I said, all right, I'll take a whack at it. I wasn't getting anywhere. And then another one of my students, George Bueller by name, George says to me one day, how you doing? I said, I'm not getting anywhere fast. And he said, why don't you just write up that story about Brother John and the umbrella that you love to tell us so much?
Mm.
So I said, wow, that's a great idea. So I wrote up a couple of days. I spent a couple of days writing up this story of Brother John and his umbrella and tying it to my definition of what the purpose of life is. And then I edited it for a couple of days, and then I was out of time, and I just hit send and sent it in at the last minute and forgot about it. I remember thinking that I liked it, but I thought no, it's too spiritual. People don't like religious stuff anymore. It'll never win. But I felt like it was a great tribute to somebody I admire tremendously and love tremendously, which is Brother John. And
Mm.
then 6 months later, I get a telephone call, and there's about 4 or 5 people on the phone, and they said, "You just won the $100,000 grand prize. Your Brother John essay." There was 10,000 essays submitted from 47 countries,
Wow.
and they chose my essays
I
to be
know
the.
it's so hard, but could you do like a quick summary for our listeners out there of the story about Brother John and the umbrella?
Sure, it was Christmas Eve, and even on Christmas Eve is a regular day at the monastery. So you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, you start going to church, then you go to work. And the only big
Mm.
difference is that instead of going to bed at 8 o'clock at night, you actually then go to a special 9 o'clock or so mass. It's midnight mass, but it's not at midnight. It's like 9 o'clock. So and it's like a long mass because it's Christmas, and so it goes to about 10:30 or so. And after that, you have this incredible thing, which is called a party, in the refectory afterwards. And they don't have many parties down there. And so you go. So I went to the party, and I'm standing there. It had all it was apple juice and cookies and stuff like that. Suddenly I was just so exhausted. I said, I got to get up again in the morning, so I got to get back to bed. So I start over towards the door, and I suddenly realize it's pouring down rain. It's 38 degrees outside. It's pouring down rain, and I don't have an umbrella. And I thought, oh, darn. I said, I'm going to have to walk a couple hundred yards back to my room, and I'm going to have a soaked surplice that I was wearing for church tomorrow. Anyway, I open the door, and the light from the door pours out, and I see this figure outlined in the rain by the light from the door.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's a
exactly.
sound effect.
And I squint, and I said, Brother John, what are you doing? And he said, he said, I'm here for to walk those who forgot their umbrellas back to their room.
Mm.
So he's standing out there in 38-degree weather under an umbrella. And so he starts walking me back to my room. And I said, here's a man who's been in the monastery for 40 years already. He doesn't get he works harder than anybody. He's like the foreman. He gets up earlier than anybody. He goes to bed later than anybody. He gets no parties. This is the one party a year the guy gets. And he would rather stand outside under an umbrella just in case some doofus like me forgot his umbrella. Where do people like that come from? How do people like that become people like that?
Mm.
Why am I not like that?
Mm.
So as I say in my essay, I said, when I got back to my room, he walked me to the church, and then I said, oh, it's okay. I can scoot through the church my room's on the other side. And I turned and I said, and I watched him going back with his flashlight, in the outlined in the rain. I said, when I got back to my room, I said, I guess I wasn't as tired as I thought, because I can say with some conviction that I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for quite a long time.
Mm.
And that's what I was agonizing about, about the fact that, who is Brother John? Why am I not like Brother John? How do you become like Brother John? So that's the setup for the story that I then go into talking about, what is the purpose of life? And I end up saying that the purpose of most people think in our relativistic age that we all have a different purpose of life, that we can find our purpose and I'm very, very dogmatic. No, every single human being has the same purpose. We are all here to become the best human being we can possibly be, which in my essay I defined as self-transcendence, to transcend ourselves. And there's many words for it. It could go back to Alan Watts talking about cosmic consciousness. But I said later on, I elaborate on this whole thing in my second book, because what happened is that ended up, I just sat down one weekend and I wrote what I thought was a white paper, because I'm a businessman, saying, why are these darn monks so damn good in business? They're all 65 years old or older. They don't care about business. They only work 4 hours a day and they're silent. And yet everything they touch turns to money. Why? And so I wrote this, what I thought was a white paper. And I get a telephone call, and the guy says, I'm an editor of Forbes magazine. Somebody sent me this white paper that you wrote. I'd like to turn it into a 4-part article because it's too long for a single article, and publish it in Forbes. Would that be all right with you? And I said, fine, and so he publishes it. It goes viral, fabulously successful. He's the one that gave it the name Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks. And that led to an invitation from Columbia Business School Publishing to turn it into a book. The book's been very successful. But in the book, I come back on and I said, listen, the purpose of every human being, all of us, whether you agree with me or not, basically, if you disagree with me, you're wrong. I go on to make my case. The purpose of every human life is to be transformed from selfishness to selflessness, to be transformed from a selfish human being into a selfless human being. And this is the purpose of every human life. And I established that in my book by saying, if you look at almost every movie that you go to see, almost all of them are based, like Groundhog Day or whatever, are based on the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell. And every single one of them, I could tell, and I list a bunch of them, I could give you a bunch more, are based on somebody like Bill Murray starting out as a selfish jerk, thinking only about himself. Neo is the same way. By the end of the movie, he has been transformed into a selfless person. And I go on to say that all life is longing for transformation. Every acorn longs to be transformed into an oak. Every caterpillar longs to be transformed into a butterfly. But there's 3 levels of transformation. When a thirsty man drinks, he transforms his condition. When a poor man hits the lottery, he transforms his circumstances. But when Mr. Scrooge wakes up on Christmas morning an utterly new man, he has experienced a transformation of being. And that's a classic example. Mr. Scrooge starts out as a selfish, SOB. By the end of the story, he has been transformed into this selfless, wonderfully selfless, happy person. And this transformation of being is what we all really want. Unfortunately, we usually try to pursue it mistakenly, thinking that if I can just take a lot of drugs or drink or sex, that's transformations of condition, that will fill the soul hole that Hugh was talking about. Or if I can just get famous, or if I can make money, that's a transformation of circumstance, that will fill up the soul hole. But neither of those things work, because what we're really all longing for is this transformation of being, to be transformed from a selfish person to a selfless person, and all of this, by the way, it's great that we started with My Dark Night of the Soul. There's no way I could have written any of it. I'm writing all of this from my personal perspective. It's all based on the transformational journey that I went through. This is not theoretical.
Right. Experiential.
This is my life story.
Well, what I find so fascinating about what you found And as I understand it, I have a different spiritual path, but it comes to the same conclusion that you realize that you're everything and nothing. And how when you hit the dark night of the soul, you hit what in some Eastern religions would call a place of voidness, where,
Right.
where there's nothing, there's nothingness, where you're saying, my whole life is an illusion. I'm nothing. And in fact, we are nothing. But then the correlate of I'm nothing is that we're everything. So,
Exactly.
you kind of, and then when you reach that point to transform from ego self, to selflessness, to your
Exactly.
divine self, that's where you were at. It sounds like. I mean, you were there.
Absolutely. The mystics, that's why, you're sounding very Zen-like, which I hate, by the way, I hate the way everything's Zen-like, now means to be very peaceful, and it has nothing to do with Zen. This whole idea of the void and everything has everything to do with Zen. And of course, the interpretation of nothing is no thing. It's not
Hmm.
nothing. It's the God or enlightenment or what is not a thing.
Right.
It's not an object.
Not material in this
It's
material
not
world. Yeah.
material. It's not, it's something that's transcendent.
Right.
And I couldn't agree with you more. And in order for you to find this, you have to be stripped of everything you are not.
Mm.
And that's a very painful, you're stripped of all the things that you think you are, all the illusions you have about yourself, about life. And it's a very, very painful process.
Mm.
And I can speak from people surrendering is a very difficult thing to do because when the ego is dying, it feels like you are dying.
Right.
It literally feels like somebody's holding your head under the water,
Right.
and you fight like crazy with all the self-preservation. I remember I was going to this psychologist, and I was just, all he was doing was crying, and I was so depressed and weeping and everything. And one day he said to me, he said, August, he said, when I look at you, he said, I look at someone who's flapping their arms like wings, trying to stay 100 feet above the earth for fear of letting go and plunging down and being destroyed. And I said, yeah. And
Wow.
he said, the problem is, he said, I'm sitting here looking. He said, you're only about a centimeter off the ground.
Wow.
And, but all the intellectual knowledge in the world doesn't help you. It's kind of like I saw a movie just yesterday, and it was one of those situations where a guy couldn't swim, and the other guy says, "I'll help you get across here. Just hang on." And about halfway through, the guy who can't swim panics,
Mhm.
and comes very close to drowning them both. And when you're panicking like that, there's not all the somebody say, "Hey, you're killing us both. You're going to drown us both. You've got to relax." It doesn't do any good. When
Mhm.
panic takes over, it takes over.
Mhm.
And I just remember thinking to myself that all the reading and all the studying I had done didn't do me any good with it. But this is the process that you go through because of what the stages that I frankly think there is only one spiritual path. And I think Joseph Campbell nailed it. And he says that and I really stripped it down in my book to just the fundamentals, because he gets into what he calls the hero's journey.
Mhm.
And the first stage of the hero's journey is the vocation or the call. This is when Moses calls, this is when I got seized by the idea.
Mhm.
The second stage of the hero's journey is when, and all these movies are based on the car pulls up in front of the hero's house and says, come on, you got to go, Clint Eastwood, you got to come back to the Marine Corps because only you can help us defeat the evil, whatever. And of course, then the next stage of the hero's journey is resistance to the call.
Mhm.
Moses says, no, I can't go talk to Pharaoh. My brother is a better speaker than I am. I can't talk. And what does Clint Eastwood say? Get the hell out of here. I wouldn't come back to the Marine Corps for all the tea in China. Yeah. But eventually he reconsiders, and he does. And the next stage is the desert. And this is when you're formed or trained. And this is when Yoda stands over the hero and screams, don't try, do. Or the Karate
Right.
Kid, the master makes him do this. Or in Kill Bill, she's got to just keep hitting the board, keep hitting the board. And this is the agony of the training process that you have to go through. This is the part that most of us don't want to do. This is everybody. A big argument I always get into with people is, come on, don't you have a path where I don't have to do all the work? No, I'm sorry, you got to do all the
Yeah.
work. And then the next stage of the hero's journey is the great trial,
Mm.
because the hero develops power in the desert, in the desert stage when he's being trained, and then he has to decide, is he going to use this for selfish reasons or unselfish reasons? And in the movies, this is a really great tension point. Darth Vader, he takes the power of the light and he ends up going to the dark side with it. And then the next stage is the death and rebirth stage. And this is classic from the Matrix movie where Neo can't defeat Agent Smith on his own with his own personal power. So he gets killed by Agent Smith, but he's connected by a phone line from the Matrix back to reality to a woman. And the woman's name just happens to be Trinity.
Right.
So she represents grace, love, divine, the divine. And she's connected by the phone line, which is the grace. So she pumps the grace down to him through her love, which allows him to come back to life. And now he's not just working on his own selfish power. He's leaning on the divine power. And now he's able to defeat Agent Smith. And then the final stage of the hero's journey after that is the return to help others. So then the hero finally comes back and returns to help others. And once you know this model, I mean, you can almost ruin the movies for yourself, because every single movie, and the fact that we can watch 1,000 movies based on this same model, read 1,000,000 books based on this same model. It has a hypnotic pull. The hero's journey has a hypnotic pull on us. This tells me something very clearly. We all want to take the hero's journey.